Dragon Dogma 2 is right around the corner. With so many features coming to us on March 22nd, I figured what better time it would be to release a video that covers just about everything that we know about Dragon Dogma 2 and everything that you need to know before you decide to buy the game. This video will contain details on just about everything that Dragon Dogma 2 has to offer. In this video today, you're going to find information about the setting, the story, the characters, the pawns, the exploration features, the quests, the combat, the monsters, and the vocations all wrapped into one video. The goal of this video is to answer any questions you might have about the game at large as far as features go. As such, since there will be many references to the first game, Dragon's Dogma, and its DLC companion, Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen, there will be major spoilers for those games in the story section especially. So if you're worried about spoilers on the first game, first of all, the second game comes out very quickly, you better get on that. And second, you can find most of those spoilers in the story section. I would not recommend watching that if you're concerned at all about that. But this video should be treated as a broad overview of all the features that we have. This is not one of my everything we know videos. In those types of videos, I go over every single detail and cover every single thing that we know about every single feature. The way I went about making this video is providing something that a friend could share to another friend to help them decide whether or not to get Dragon's Dogma 2 or not. So if someone's on the fence and you show them this video, it's going to share with them absolutely everything that they could hope to know about what to expect in the game and help them decide whether or not it's right for them. That being said, the video is very long for my type of content, so I think I did a pretty good job whenever it comes to that. Also, since I'm not one of the lucky content creators that got to have a hands-on experience with the game early, it's important to note that I do borrow gameplay footage many times throughout this project. I have done my best to give credit for where it is due, and I'm sorry if I missed one or two spots. Most of the footage is from official sources in IGN, but there are a few other content creators' names that you'll notice if you've been following the Dragon's Dogma 2 content creation scene. But again, I make sure to give credit where it's due. And we're going to get into the video very soon. But first, a word of advice. Hello, fellow Arisen. While wolves might hunt in packs, you can also hunt with packs of champions in this game, both on mobile and PC. And that game is, of course, Raid Shadow Legends. There are over 800 different champions that you can master, ranging from lizard-like creatures to elves, orcs, dwarves, demons, and so much more. There's never been a better time to hop into Raid as it celebrates its 5th anniversary. You get bonuses worth $100, including Epic Champion Lady Atessa, 500k silver, and many more different resources right from the start. Plus, after reaching level 25, you'll get an additional 500k silver, epic skill tomes, potions, and so on. And as if that wasn't enough, if you use my link down in the description and use the festive promo code FESTIVAL5, you can get another Epic Champion Tayrel, another 500k silver, and an endless amount of other rewards. There has never been a better time to start playing Raid, and all these bonuses are again available by downloading Raid only via my link down in the description. Or if that's not your thing, you can also scan my QR code on screen. In fact, Raid has a lot of new features that they've implemented in just the last year, so even if you've played it 3 years ago in 2021, it's practically a completely different game now. They've released a new rarity of champion called Mythical Champions, which can use metamorph skills to transform in between two forms. There's the Cursed City, one of Raid's biggest features with 100 stages to complete, or you can try out my favorite, which is the live arena, and fight 4v4 to the death with your team versus other players. So if that sounds good to you, come find me under my name OSK Gaming and join my clan, and we'll be legends together. So just hit up my link in the description and I'll see you on the battlefield. And another big thank you to Raid Shadow Legends for being the first sponsor on this channel, and with that, we are back to the video. To describe the setting of Dragon's Dogma 2, we need to take a step back. Dragon's Dogma 2 takes place in a parallel world to the first game, and it has some similarities and also some differences. By just looking at the game, we can see that one of the similarities is this open grassland that's known as Vermund. This is a kingdom where the humans live, and it is ruled by a sovereign who is always in Arisen. Throughout the region of Vermund, there are many different grasslands, mountains, and areas for humans to grow food in. The land is rich with resources, and the humans that live here, for the most part, know where to find them. This is where the journey of the Arisen will begin. And it is through this first fertile land that you'll need to make your journey and proceed to cement cement your legacy. Along the way, you may encounter some elves that also live in the region of Vermund in their own secluded area known as the Sacred Arbor. Elves are much like humans except for the ears, of course, and they speak in their own language and mostly keep to themselves. They have their own sacred customs and traditions that they have separate from humans, but every so often you might see one or two make their way to Vermund for trading purposes. Along your journey, you may meet a pawn or two that can speak the Elven language that you will need to translate once you're in their Sacred Arbor. As we make our way out of the Sacred Arbor, we must talk about the other neighboring region to Vermund, which is Batal. Batal is the desert land home to the Beastren, and it is a very arid and very dangerous land. The monsters here are much more fearsome than you'll find in the Vermund region, and you'll need to be on your toes to encounter each and every one of them. The Beastren people who live here are much like lions in their guise, and they are covered in fur and have pointy ears. In their culture, the pawns are the source of all misfortune, and they worship the lambent flame instead of incurring an Arisen to be their leader. As such, their fate and their culture differs drastically from the Vermund region. Depending on whether you decide to make a human or Beastren Arisen, you may get different interactions between the two kingdoms depending on which one you're in. As each species has its respective home, you may get some weird looks if you're a Beastren within the Vermund region. And similar, if you're a human in the Batal region, specifically in Arisen, you will hold no outside power as you would in the Vermund region. On the broad cosmological scale, this world is connected to the world of Dragon's Dogma 1 through the Rift. It is described as a parallel world, whereas the Rift will connect many different parallel realities. The Arisen can access the Rift by interacting with a Rift Stone, which will allow them to access this mysterious land. Throughout the Rift, you will encounter many different pawns, which are the primary partners of other Arisens scattered across many different realities. At the beginning of your journey, you will be able to craft a pawn to your own liking and send it on its way to the Rift. Many Arisen like you will do much the same thing, and it is here where all the pawns are. And it is here where it'll be up to you which pawns to take on your journey. As you adventure throughout this setting of Vermund, Batal, the Sacred Arbor, and the Rift, it'll be up to you to determine what happens to this land and to all the others, and discover the truth behind the nature of this world. Being that Dragon's Dogma 2 is obviously a numbered title, it makes sense to be familiar with the first entry into the series, Dragon's Dogma, or as you can buy it today, Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen. Before I go on any further, I would just like to give another warning that this is spoiler territory for the story of the first game, and could lead into some story beats for the story of Dragon's Dogma 2. So again, spoiler warning before we get started. For a brief overview of the story of Dragon's Dogma 1, we must be familiar with the concept of eternal return. Simply put, the world is in a cycle in Dragon's Dogma 1, and that is the whole basis on the fight with the dragon. You see, the world is dependent on the will of a single individual known as the Seneschal. The Seneschal is essentially the god of the Dragon's Dogma 1 universe, and life itself is fed through the Seneschal's will. It's unknown what was there before the first Seneschal, but for now, let's just focus on the fact that there is a cycle involving the Arisen, the dragon, and the Seneschal. As I've said before, the world feeds off the will of the Seneschal, and it is necessary for life to continue. As the Seneschal's will is expired, he then sends out a dragon to find the next Arisen. You see, the Seneschal himself is another Arisen that came before you, and he became the Seneschal by besting the previous Seneschal in a clash of wills. As we all know, the Arisen is destined to face the dragon which stole their heart. Upon defeating the dragon, you are then granted access to the Seneschal, and you are slated to try to defeat him to then become the next Seneschal. Should you fail, you then become the next dragon to seek out the next Arisen. And if you do prevail, you then become the next Seneschal in the cycle. And thus the cycle continues, now feeding off of your will instead of the previous Seneschals. At the end of the story of Dragon's Dogma 1, you plunge the Godsbane blade into your own heart, which then stills the cycle. This frees the world from the cycle of eternal return, and you are then cast out of the rift along with your pawn. Your pawn becomes inhabited within your own body, becoming human. and they go on their merry way. So at the end of Dragon's Dogma 1, the world is freed from the cycle of eternal return, or so it would seem. So with that context in mind, it is curious to see that we have another dragon in Dragon's Dogma 2. Did the cycle perpetuate itself without the Seneschal? Is there a certain background force that is enforcing the cycle no matter what the Seneschal does? It is currently unknown, but that is the basis for which we start our Dragon's Dogma 2 story. As the Arisen at the beginning of Dragon's Dogma 2, you awaken in an underground location with your heart stolen. The basis of the Dragon's Dogma 2 storyline is amnesia, a common trope used in modern ARPGs. Throughout your adventure, you will be regaining memories as you pass through key locations, and it is through this regaining of memories that you will realize your destiny. At some point in the story, you do make your way to Vernworth, which is the seat of Vermund. You meet up with Brant, who is one of the characters we'll go over later, and while normally you would be welcomed as royalty, as Vermund is traditionally ruled by the Arisen, it is an interesting predicament when a false Arisen has assumed the role of sovereign. This is a plot put into place by Queen Disa that we'll go over later, but for the moment you are essentially an outcast in terms of royalty. It'll be up to you to get to the bottom of this plot and presumably rule over Vernworth once the plot is foiled. While regaining your memories, you do meet up with a woman named Ulrika, who was the woman you saved from the dragon attack in Melv. At some point, we do catch a ride on a griffin all the way to Batal and encounter a ghostly figure, the identity of which is unknown as of now. Surely there will be another side to the Batal kingdom, as with their beliefs, they do believe that the pawn is the source of all misfortune, and the religious order in that culture believes that the lambent flame that they worship will keep away the dragon. With context from the first game, we can call into question what this belief might be, and also the fact that Beastren can become Arisen, so it's not 100% sure how they plan to keep the dragon away with their lambent flame, or how that originated. A theory of mine that I will posit into the story section here has to do with the Dragon's Plague, which is a disease caught by pawns that is passed throughout the rift. It's unknown of the origins of the Dragon's Plague, but it is said to cause a great calamity once the Dragon's Plague enters its terminal state within the host pawn. It's possible that a great calamity fell upon the Batal region in the past, and it is because of this calamity that the Batal region inhabitants have cast away the pawns into such a low standing. I'm sure we'll find out more as the story progresses once we get into Dragon's Dogma 2. And as a final point to lay out the story, at some point we do get attacked by the giant bronze golem Talos. Talos arises from the sea and has many different similarities or callbacks to what would be the brine. The brine is an entity that lurks in deep water and will swallow up the Arisen before reviving them on dry land. Because the bronze soldier arises from the water, it is thought that along with its color scheme, it may have some connections to the brine. Regardless, at some point in the story, we will have to put a stop to Talos before he destroys any more civilization than he does in the cutscenes we already know of. So between all these elements, the fact that the dragon steals our hearts, and all the other calamities that we must prevent, we are well set out for the story of Dragon's Dogma 2, and we'll surely find out more as we progress in the game. As we journey through the world of Dragon's Dogma 2, both in the nations of Vermund and Batal, we will encounter several different NPCs and characters along the way. Characters are done a bit differently in Dragon's Dogma 2, and it's important to lay out the difference as we move forward. For starters, characters will have their own affinity, and completing tasks or performing actions that the character would agree with or align with will increase that affinity. Conversely, if you perform actions that the character dislikes, you might lose affinity with that character. And lastly, it's important to note that affinity between characters is not exclusive to just you, the Arisen. If you happen to increase affinity with one character, you may lose affinity with another. And this might lead to some awkward situations, as Hideaki Itsuno has mentioned that, for example, if you are having fun and wanting to play around at your own residence, which he has confirmed we do get a house in this game, and another character happens to stop by that also has affection for you, then the two characters in question might have a slight conflict. Likewise, if you do something nice for someone's child, then the parent would then gain affinity and would see you in a positive light. And this could lead into all sorts of different results, and this would include holding grudges, gift giving, and even romance. It has been confirmed via the ESRB summary that there will be implied sexual themes in the game, including but not limited to implied special relations, as well as renting out different people for said relations, and that's putting it mildly. There are also in-game items that can increase this affinity as well. Take for example the Heartfelt Pendant, which can be found in the Deluxe Edition whenever you pre-order Dragon's Dogma 2. The description reads, "Obtain a pendant overflowing with tender affection. When offered as a gift, it deepens the bond between giver and receiver." For those of you familiar with the first game, this is similar to the Arisen's Bond, which you could give to an NPC of your choice to max out their disposition towards you. Additionally, if you do happen to find out what an NPC likes to be given, you can then give them whichever item they want to increase their affinity as well. Just keep in mind that treating one character especially well may cause jealousy in others. If the conflict between two characters becomes too much, they may end up, let's just say, 6 feet under. When an NPC is in this state, they will be located to the morgue for 3 in-game days. During this time, they will be able to be revived using a Wake Stone, which is a special item in Dragon's Dogma 2. It is an item that can be used on both the Arisen and any character that has deceased and can revive them from the dead. However, if the Arisen cannot make it to the morgue within the 3-day period, the character in question will be lost forever. This can create several different outcomes as far as affinity goes, but also with certain quests and story beats as well. So make sure you're keeping track of every character you need alive at every given time. Now that we've explained certain mechanics as to how characters work, let's go over some of the main characters you'll encounter on your journey. Starting with the fan favorite Ulrika. This is the young lady that you rescue whenever you fight off the dragon. She nurses you back to health after the dragon makes you look like a burnt piece of bacon. She was previously the young leader of Melv and has a strong sense of responsibility and will train diligently to protect her people. It should be noted as well that she appears to be of the archer vocation. In one of the game's trailers, she's also seen holding off several guards from firing at a character as they fly in on a griffin. So it may be that she rises to a higher level of leadership after Melv gets destroyed from the dragon attack. Next we have Brant, who is the honest and righteous captain of the Palace Guard. He looks to be of the fighter vocation and is concerned for the best interests of Vermund, and even took a demotion whenever he stood against Queen Disa and her false Arisen plot. He is very firmly on the side of the Arisen and will help you in any way that he can. And speak of the devil, let's talk about Queen Disa. She was the queen to the previous sovereign of Vermund, and she took charge of the government after the sovereign's death. As is noted in the previous section, the Sovereign of Vermund is always an Arisen, meaning that she was the supposed spouse to the Arisen. By the way, as an aside, it should be noted that Arisen are not able to age while their heart is held by the dragon, so what this means is the Arisen must have been felled by other means than simply growing old. And if you paid special attention to the story section of this video, then you could probably come to your own conclusion what happened to him. As she seeks to maintain power in her current seat, she schemes to install her beloved son Sven as the next king, despite him not being an Arisen. As one can expect, she is very disdainful, very disagreeable, and with that we'll move on to her son Sven. Sven is the beloved son of Disa, as we just mentioned, and is a candidate to become the next ruler. However, like Brant, he is a righteous individual and does not seek power for power's sake, and he is actively against his mother's plot. He is described as elegant in his princeliness, but he can sometimes be naive. For any general Arisen looking to do good, he will be an ally on your quest. Next is Wilhelmina, who is the proprietress of the Rose Chateau in Vermund's capital, and her patrons include many different influential members of Vermund's nobility. She is very intelligent, open-minded, and is a bit enigmatic. Not much is known about Wilhelmina. It is assumed that she will be plotting some sort of moves within the nation's capital. However, other than a Yennefer lookalike, like there's not really much else that we know. The knowledge that we have on her is as enigmatic as her actual personality. Moving on to some of the elves we encounter, we get a glimpse at Glendweir, who is the first to lead us to the Sacred Arbor. He is a young elf with an air of gentleness and timidity that is rare among the usually haughty elves. As was mentioned in the setting, the elves mostly keep to themselves and even have their own language and prefer to keep their society separate from the rest of Vermund. He is one of the rare few that is fluent in the human language, and although he is interested in human tools, he unfortunately is not very good at archery. And in Dragon's Dogma 2's world, archery is all the elves really do. If you take a cursory look at any of the elves that we've seen so far, they all hold bows. He seeks out a human adventurer to help him rescue his sister Dorianne. She is under attack whenever we first meet her, but we come to know her as a quiet, refined young woman with elegant manners. She can understand human speech up to a limited amount due to her brother Glendweir, but is otherwise not very fluent, and you will likely need a translator to speak with her. However, thankfully because of her brother, she's mostly open-minded and is welcoming to those of other races. She will very likely be another ally on our adventure. Next, we'll pay a visit to the Batal region where we meet Priestess Nadinia. In her young age, she was made High Priestess to the Lambent Flame and was educated as a royal from very young. Overall, she desires to help her nation prosper and maintains the peace between Batal and Vermund. And one of the Beastren who protects her and helps her in this manner is Manila, who leads the guard of the Lambent Flame. Much like Nadinia, she tries to follow her example and is concerned about discrimination between all the races and wants to be more righteous herself. What this tells me is that there might be some underlying prejudices that she's trying to overcome, so if we are a human going into the Batal Kingdom, she might not trust us at first. I would expect to see some friction between us and her at first meeting. And that concludes most of the main characters. However, I will cover some of the vocation meisters that we get to meet along our journey that have been revealed thus far. Vocation meisters are masters of their respective vocations, and they can teach meisters teachings, which are special moves that you can equip to your own vocation. And this will be covered a bit later whenever we get to the vocation section. For now, let's meet Lenart, who was a partner to Ulrika and a long-term servant of the fortress village of Melv. He has exceptional swordsmanship and leadership skills, and he has held the fort and protected the land from the dragon many times. Even though he has grown old for a human, he has not showed any signs of slowing down as far as his skills go, and this makes him a prime target for any up-and-coming fighter vocation that wants to learn a thing or two from him. Next is the Mystic Spearhand Meister Sigurd, and I have a feeling that we'll be getting to know him quite well. Sigurd is a quiet dragon hunter, and he is obsessed with exterminating all of dragonkind. If anything even vaguely looks like a dragon, he'll probably attack it. It is stated that he hunts dragons for his own personal reasons, meaning there might have been a loved one that was involved in a dragon attack, either by the dragon itself or a drake, and that is what is fueling his ambition. So be on the lookout for any underlying motivations for his dragon hunt. And finally, we have Luz, who is the Vermundian court oracle and trickster meister. She was another one of the few who spoke out against the false Arisen taking the throne and has since been hunted down. She is currently in hiding whenever we meet her. However, from this picture that we can see from the Dragon's Dogma 2 website, we can see that the architecture and everything in the room that she's sitting in seems to indicate that she's hiding out in the Batal region. At least, that is the vibe I'm getting from the room. For any trickster vocation users, she will definitely be on your short list of people to visit whenever you get skilled enough with the vocation. As we meet more and more characters, I'm sure that our relationships will develop even further, and we'll need all the help we can get in this journey to slay the dragon and free this world from its tyranny. One of the most important aspects about Dragon's Dogma 2 is the pawn system. Pawns are AI-controlled beings that will accompany you on your journey, and you are able to make one of your own pawns that will grow and train alongside you as you level up. Additionally, you can also hire 2 more pawns from other players, but they will not level up with you the same way that your main pawn will. The advantage to hiring more pawns is that they may have more quest knowledge or simply might be better specialized in certain tasks than your other main pawn pawn would be. For example, if you've never encountered a certain quest before, obviously your main pawn would not know how to do that quest either, but a pawn that you hire from across the rift might have already encountered it and will show you the way towards completion. Similarly, you might encounter a pawn that is useful for elf speak and can be used to translate their wordings. Or you may find another pawn that is a logistician and will move your inventory items to themselves whenever you become too heavy. Additionally, during general gameplay, pawns can be commanded using the directional buttons on your controller. They have a go command, which essentially is an encouragement, making them continue what they were about to do. So if a pawn suggests a quest to you, if you press the go command, they will then continue guiding you to that quest. There is the wait command, which will make the pawns wait in place. There's the to me command, which will make the pawns surround you. And then there is the help command, where pawns will rush to your aid should you so choose. And all of these pawns can be accessed by visiting a rift stone and entering into the rift. As mentioned previously, it is sort of a link between alternate realities and is where all the pawns in the rift can congregate. Most pawns will be hired at your own same level and can be hired for free. However, if you want to hire a higher level pawn, you will need to pay what's called rift crystals, which are gained from quests and potential drops from enemies. Pawns are able to equip any basic or advanced vocation, but they cannot equip hybrid vocations. This limits their vocation list to fighter, mage, thief, archer, warrior, and sorcerer respectively. And even though they might not have access to hybrid vocations, they can still be every bit as strong as the Arisen in certain circumstances and will be a great boon to you on your journey. They provide many helpful hints, such as previously mentioned quest knowledge, but they can also give you knowledge on how to fight the current enemy you're facing. So if an enemy is weak to fire, or if wolves hunt in packs, you'll be sure to learn about it from the pawns. They are also there to encourage you and help you along your journey, and can even save your life on occasion. However, one bit of inequality between you and your pawns is the fact that they can be revived, but they cannot revive you. From a gameplay perspective, you are the single most important person in your own playthrough, and if you are in danger, it is much better to allow your pawn to save you than to try to save your pawn. Pawns can be revived by approaching and using the circle button. After a short revive time, they will then be rejuvenated with a certain amount of health left. A useful addition in Dragon's Dogma 2 in comparison to Dragon's Dogma 1 is now if pawns dive into deep water and get swallowed up by the brine, they will then be deposited on dry land in a short while nearby the player. And for your main pawn in particular, they will start to learn by example and start mimicking your behavior much like a parent and child. You see, pawns don't actually have a will of their own, and it is the will of the Arisen that they feed off of. They are inspired by our actions, which might seem a bit familiar if you watch the story section of this video. However, the Arisen is not the only one who can enforce their will on pawns. The monster type Drake is in the lore what's known as a former Arisen. When approached, they will communicate with you via this pathway, and if you're not careful, they can take hold of your pawn and enforce their will upon them. If they happen to do so, the pawn will then switch sides and start fighting against you. So for this enemy type, you'll want to be especially careful. And then there's the matter of the Dragon's Plague, which we've explained before. The Dragon's Plague is a contagious disease that affects only pawns and can travel with them throughout their adventures through the rift. Once infected, the pawn is said to be more bold and brash with their behavior, and they'll rush into battle a lot more fervently than previously. It is said in folk tales that upon the terminal stage, the pawns will then cause a great calamity to befall the land around them. What this calamity is exactly is currently unknown, but it's up to you to find out in Dragon's Dogma 2. At the heart of it, pawns are very helpful companions that will help you throughout your adventures in Dragon's Dogma 2. Whether they're there to help you, protect you, or provide some comic relief, they will be by your side always, including during your fight with the dragon. The game world in Dragon's Dogma 2 is incredibly vast, being at least 4 times the size of the first game. However, the development team seems to think that it's actually much bigger than that. Of course, any RPG is going to have a huge map, although the main emphasis is going to be how dense the map is and how well filled in it is. And this time around, that is the main focus of Dragon's Dogma 2. There are plenty of locales, points of interest, and enemies to encounter while you are out on your journey. And in this section of the video, we will will cover how you'll be traversing the world, getting from point A to point B, and what you'll need to be fully prepared for each trek. Starting out, we'll build off of the previous section and cover pawns once again. They will be your main source of information as you are wandering throughout your journey. In terms of waypoints and map markers, there are very little in terms of what's telling you where to go, and there's very little indication for secret areas. However, if one of the pawns in your party happens to have experienced the route that you're on before, they can point you towards secret areas, quest objectives, and many more. They can tell you which path is the safest route to take, as well as which one would be more dangerous. They'll tell you if they remember treasure down a certain path, and even logistically they'll help you rearrange your inventory and help you find gatherables given the correct inclination and specialization. While you're out with your pawns, you can also move certain items from your own inventory into your pawn's inventory, meaning that you don't have to be in a heavy or very heavy state no matter what point of the journey you happen to be traveling on. In fact, if you intend to get drops from many big monsters, a lot of those drops can be very heavy, so it's very useful to offload some of that weight onto some of your pawns. But now let's talk about the world itself. We've already covered in the setting portion of this video that there are the nations of Vermund and Batal. Vermund is the easier, mountainous, grassy location, and Batal is the harder, more arid region. As you travel through the land, there is a day-night cycle, and if you're in an especially long fight, you can find yourself both in and out of day and night pretty routinely. Generally, you'll want to travel by day as it's easier to see and there are mostly easier monsters to deal with. Nighttime is very unforgiving in Dragon's Dogma 2, and you can barely see in front of you unless you carry a lantern with you. By the way, a nice change from Dragon's Dogma 2 is that you can hotkey your lantern by holding down the L1 button and pressing the right directional button. And while we're at it, you also have hotkeys if you need to quickly heal, quickly recover your stamina, or go to the item menu altogether by pressing the L1 and up button, the L1 and down button, or the L1 and left button respectively. But as I was saying, there are exclusive enemies at night and they can tend to be a little bit more dangerous, so you'll want to make sure you know what time of day you want to travel in whenever you go out on your journey. If it ends up becoming too much for you, you can try to find a campsite, which is where you can rest for the night. Campsites are already predetermined in the game world, and once you find one, you will need to use a camping kit, which will allow you to rest for the night. While you are at a campsite, you can talk with your pawns, especially with your main pawn. You can tend to the fire, and you can even engage in cooking. Cooking will grant you certain buffs depending on what type of food you have with you. And by the way, in case you were wondering, the cooking footage is live action. However, most camping kits are very heavy and very fragile and can lead to getting attacked by many different monsters. So while you are out and about in the world, you are never truly safe. On the flip side though, camping is one of the only ways to increase your loss gauge, which is this white bar that drops whenever you get damaged by an enemy. The only other way to restore this health is by going and resting at an inn. There is no mage and no curative you can take to recover this loss gauge. It must be recovered by resting at a camp or resting at an inn. While you're actually out journeying in the game world, you have multiple ways to move around. A good change from Dragon's Dogma 1 is now you can vault over obstacles instead of needing to constantly jump over them, and much like the game Skyrim, you can now scale down cliffs as long as you have a nice, good patch of ground to land on. However, if you mess up your descent, you can find yourself taking a lot of damage. Also, one more thing you might want to know is that swimming is not a thing in Dragon's Dogma 2. There is an enemy called the Brine that lurks in deep water, and it manifests in the form of these magenta tentacles. If you happen to go too deep in the water, you will then be swallowed up and revived on dry land shortly thereafter. Thankfully, this does not count as a death towards you or your pawns as we mentioned in the previous section. However, it will cause other enemies to be swallowed forever, but you will still gain experience and discipline points. While you're on your trip, you can always reference the in-game map, which will tell you in real time where you are and give certain icons on it. The most notable of which are all these different settlements that we can see on the map, as well as the main markers for any story quests. Throughout your journey in the game world, you will also notice that there are many different interactable sites that you can use. There are several rocks, barrels, explosive barrels, and even trebuchets you can interact with, and some might even unlock secret areas. So you'll want to be sure to keep a keen eye out for any secret treasures or any areas you might be unable to reach otherwise. And by the way, seeker tokens are making a return from Dragon's Dogma 1, so have have fun finding all of them. There are a lot. If you find yourself tiring of the long journeys, there are two main mechanics in Dragon's Dogma 2 that can get you to your destination a little bit faster. Starting with the returning feature of fairy stones, these make a full return in Dragon's Dogma 2. There are certain locations that will contain port crystals which you must plant at your desired location in order to be able to use a fairy stone with it. You can also transport directly to major cities with the fairy stone as well. Keep in mind though that these fairy stones do not come cheap and will cost a significant amount of gold to buy even one of them. And traditionally, port crystals are needed to use them in the first place. So if there is an area that you need to teleport to, you will likely need to travel to it on foot first, plant a port crystal, and then use a fairy stone for later. But once you unlock it, you won't have to again. The other system of fast travel in Dragon's Dogma 2 is the ox cart system. Ox carts are freely roaming carriages that you may find in the game world. They do not have set locations that they go to, and you won't be able to freely choose where you end up whenever you travel via an ox cart. They of course cost gold to ride, but once you're on an ox cart, you can then choose to doze off to arrive at your destination much faster. Depending on the length of your journey, it may end up being nighttime by the time that you reach your destination. But this is not a completely safe method of travel, as you may be ambushed by several monsters along the way to your destination. All this to say, the world is definitely not safe in Dragon's Dogma 2, and you will need to always be on your toes whenever you make any kind of journey outside the safety of the city. Dragon's Dogma 2 does things a bit differently from the first entry. It seems now Dragon's Dogma 2 will be following sort of a hybrid between the Dark Souls series and Dragon's Dogma 1. Instead of needing to go to marked NPCs or visit a notice board, quests are given out freely from different NPCs, and they do not have any marker over their head this time. Questing is done more organically. If a quest is to be given out, you will be approached by an NPC, which will then initiate what would be considered a quest. However, in true Dragon's Dogma 1 fashion, there are many ways that you can deal with quests that you are given. For example, take this quest with the Jadeite Orb that we see in many of the previews. This main merchant wants you to find the Jadeite Orb and ensure it gets back to his hands, but before we do that, it seems that his servant wants to keep the Jadeite Orb for himself, so he then asks you to find it for him and return it to him. So already you're given the choice which person to give the Jadeite Orb to. Eventually you can go get the Jadeite Orb during this quest and make your way back to town. And this is where the system called forgery comes in, which is borrowed from Dragon's Dogma 1. With forgeries, you can make a near identical copy of any item that you give to the fence. For some items you're able to make exact replicas, but for others you will be able to make facsimiles of the original item, meaning that they do not retain their initial value or function. And this is the case for the Jadeite Orb. So in this example, what the player ended up doing is making two forgeries of the Jadeite Orb, keeping the real one for themselves and giving both the merchant and the servant the fake versions. The servant accepts this gift willingly and gives you a payment, while the merchant is a lot more suspicious. So therefore, he goes to get the Jadeite Orb forgery appraised, and wouldn't you know it, it's the guy that made you the forgery that will be doing the appraising. While getting the Jadeite Orb appraised, you can then bribe him to say that the Jadeite Orb forgery is the real thing and will satisfy the merchant. You can then at this point keep the real Jadeite Orb for whatever purpose you see fit. I gave this example just to show just how crazy and wide branching the questing system in Dragon's Dogma 2 can be, and while that is the primary one that I know of, there are sure to be many more scenarios like this, and I'm sure that that will affect different affinities with different characters. Additionally, some quests will be timed, meaning that once you start the quest, after a certain amount of time, the quest will automatically fail or simply cancel out. Take for example this quest where a little boy gets kidnapped by wolves. A little bit of common sense will tell you that obviously we cannot wait around and let this boy enjoy his time with the wolves. Otherwise he will be someone's dinner, so you must complete this quest quickly, or you could find the boy is taking a dirt nap somewhere close. And these are just some of the shenanigans that you can get up to with the questing in Dragon's Dogma 2, and I'm sure that you'll be able to get up to even more hijinks the more important the quests become. The Combat in Dragon's Dogma 2 is very unique in its own right in the ARPG genre. It's something of a mix between Elden Ring, Witcher 3, and Baldur's Gate 3, although it's still its own thing and is currently one of the flashiest RPG combat systems of any game that you've probably ever played, which is why the first game got so much traction even later on into its life. Between all the different classes, or vocations as they're called in Dragon's Dogma 2, there are plenty of different playstyles and different mechanics to pick up on that will definitely affect the way that you play this game. And I think that I can accurately say that there is something for everyone in Dragon's Dogma 2. If you want to be a big burly fighter wielding a sword and shield, if you want to be a mage that hangs back and supports the party, if you want to be a trickster that just hangs back and doesn't deal any direct damage but plays with the enemy's mind, there is literally something for everyone. In this section here, we'll go over the general combat mechanics before getting into the vocations later on. Generally, as you travel throughout Dragon's Dogma 2, you'll want to have a team of pawns and yourself, the Arisen. The Arisen can create one main pawn that will always be with them throughout their journey, and they can hire 2 additional pawns which are created from other players. The Arisen can be any vocation it wants to be, while pawns are limited to basic and advanced vocations, meaning that they cannot take on the likes of Mystic Spearhand, Magic Archer, Trickster, or the Warfarer. And while they are in these basic and advanced vocations, they can pretty much do everything that an Arisen can do, minus, of course, the fact that they're controlled by a player. And they also can't revive each other. It'll be up to the Arisen to revive a fallen pawn if they go silent. And if the Arisen falls silent, you'll need to use an item called a Wakestone, which is forged from 3 Wakestone shards to then revive yourself during combat. But these are very rare and very limited, so it's ideal not to use Wakestones if you can avoid it. And on that note, there are many different items you can take with you during your adventures that will aid you both while traveling and in combat. If you happen to run out of stamina while traveling or in the middle of combat, usually a pawn will be there to help you restore a little bit of stamina to get you back on your feet. It is one of the most important stats while you're in the middle of a fight to pay attention to, as you're pretty much a sitting duck and can't use any moves once you're out of stamina. As far as equipment goes, you are able to equip a piece for your head, your torso, your legs, and then a cloak to protect your back. Each piece of armor is specific to whichever vocation it displays that you can equip it to. So for example, for heavy armor, likely only fighters and warriors can wield that. For medium armor, a multitude of classes could, and the robes pretty much only meant for mages and tricksters and so on. Each piece of armor will display whichever vocation you can equip it to, so there's no confusion. Each piece of armor will directly affect your stats for defense, magic defense, resist, striking resist, knockdown resist, elemental resist, debilitation resist, and also will have a weight associated with it. And of course, the higher your defenses are, the less likely you are to take as much damage, and same thing for elements and debilitations. The higher the resist is, the less likely you are to experience any elemental damage or debilitations. As far as enemy weaknesses go, we can pay attention to the 5 archmagics for this, which will mostly cover the elemental weaknesses. The element fire can cause burning on enemies, ice can cause frostbite, which will freeze up opponents. We have thunder, which will cause them to be stunned, holy, and dark. Each individual enemy will have its own resistance to these 5 archmagics, so if you're a mage or a sorcerer or looking to recruit one, you might want to pay attention to what skills they wield. And debilitations work in much the same way. As far as general gameplay goes, there are plenty of monsters that you can encounter in the world, and we'll cover those in the next section. But for now, let's focus on what you can do with combat at hand. For many different monsters, there are several states you can find them in. One would be their normal phase, where they're attacking like normal. They can be staggered, they can be knocked down, and they can even be knocked out in some cases. In some special cases as well, enemies can even be in an injured state, meaning that they have special conditions depending on what you decide to do in the fight. For example, with this Cyclops, if you damage its eye enough, it may become blind and then wander off a cliff to then unalive itself. Additionally, if you happen to set fire to a griffin's wings, it will no longer be able to fly while the fire is ongoing. But I think the main draw that Dragon's Dogma 2's combat will bring is the ability to climb onto enemies. Dragon's Dogma 2 is very unique in this way. While many games will allow you to attack many large monsters, the only place you're really attacking is its legs. But with Dragon's Dogma 2, you can cling on to a whole bunch of enemies and get right in their face to deal some big damage. This allows the player to hit many different weak spots that would otherwise be impossible in other games. Of course, while clinging and climbing can be all fun in itself, if you manage to position yourself just right, you may be able to stand atop the monster that you are climbing, and instead of draining stamina while you're clinging to the monster, you actually won't drain stamina at all and will begin regenerating while being able to use most of your normal skills. This can allow for some big damage combos if you know what you're doing. There's also a grab mechanic in Dragon's Dogma 2. With smaller enemies, as long as an enemy is not actively attacking, you can grab them and then throw or simply release them if you'd like off a cliff. If you prefer to just tackle your enemy, you can also do that while jumping and then pressing grab on top of an enemy. If you happen to be attacking a grounded enemy or an enemy is damaged enough, you can perform an execution with a heavy attack. During this execution, the player will then enter into a certain animation and you will deal massive damage to the enemy, if not outright finishing them off. But that's not all. On larger enemies, you can also grab onto their legs if they're off balance and shift their weight depending on which position you push or pull into. In addition to everything you can do at any given time, you are also able to interact with the environment for some very unique situations. Of course, everyone at this point knows about the dam exploding whenever you throw a barrel at it to finish off this Cyclops, but you can also fire ballistas and even interact with trebuchets as we've seen before. So while you're on your journey, be sure to keep an eye out for your surroundings in case you might find an advantage anywhere. And no matter how you finish off your enemy, the XP rewards will remain the same. Speaking of which, let's get into experience and discipline points. These are two completely different point systems that will affect how you grow within Dragon's Dogma 2. Both experience and discipline points are earned whenever you fell a monster, but experience will only apply to your stats and your level up. Whenever your character levels up, you will gain a set amount of stats depending on whichever vocation you're in. In a similar way, whenever you rank up your discipline, you will then increase the rank of whatever vocation you have currently equipped. These are two completely different leveling systems with two completely different scaling systems, so they don't grow the same and they don't affect the same things. As you level up your character, you will incur better stats in general for whatever vocation you have currently equipped, and with your discipline points, you will unlock better skills and better abilities as you level up the discipline within your vocation. With that being said, stat growth is a bit different from Dragon's Dogma 1. In the first game, whenever you would level up, your stat would be permanently increased depending on whichever vocation you were when you leveled up. And in this case, the stat growth that you experienced was permanent throughout the game and it would not change even if you swapped vocations. Additionally, there was no way to reallocate your stats, say if you've been playing a fighter for the whole rest of your playthrough and then you wanted to give Magic Archer a try. Your strength would likely be too high and your magic would be very low, so the damage you would get out of Magic Archer would likely be pretty low. In Dragon's Dogma 2, however, your base stats are directly affected by whichever vocation you have currently equipped, and they will swap dynamically whenever you swap vocations. So say if you're a warrior, instead of keeping your high strength stat, as soon as you switch over to a mage vocation, your magic would then increase, your magic defense would increase as well, but your strength would then lower to accommodate the different vocation. And additionally, as with Dragon's Dogma 1, there is no way to reallocate your stat, but again, the game will optimally allocate your stats for whatever vocation you swap to. But of course, most of your stats are going to be determined by whichever equipment you happen to be wearing anyway, so make sure that you're well equipped and are ready to destroy some enemies. You're going to need all the firepower you can get whenever you finally face the dragon. The world of Dragon's Dogma 2 is full of wonder and excitement, but also full of dangers. Aside from the mountainous and arid terrain, you will have many different denizens of the land to contend with. The origins of these monsters are wide and varied, but you will still need to encounter them and you need to be prepared. So in this section, we'll give you a brief description of each monster you'll encounter and will need to be ready for in your journey. Keep in mind as well, this list are just the ones that we know of, and there could be many more in the final release. We'll cover these monsters rapid fire style. Goblins are armed demons that are smaller in stature than most humans, and they possess limited intelligence but are ferocious and move by instinct. They generally are hostile whenever you invade their territory, but they are easy to deal with. Hobgoblins are a bigger variant of goblin with a more developed stature. They are experts at movement and are very skilled at handling weapons, and it's best not to underestimate their strength. While they are still a minor threat, they can give you a run for your money if you're a lower level. Wolves hunt in packs, and they are weak to ice and fire both. They are often found roaming in the nearby forests and mountain areas and will pursue you as prey. Garms are like bigger wolves. They deal much more damage with their bite and can be devastating if you don't know how to deal with them. Harpies are flying creatures with an upper body that's like a human female. They often hover around in the skies, ready to strike at a moment's notice, but their songs can lure you to sleep. They also carry their foes high into the sky to drop them from high places. Saurians are evolved from the lizard family, and they walk around carrying staffs and spears. They mostly live near water and will lose their will to fight if you dismember their tail. Chimeras are giant four-legged, three-headed monsters with the visage of a lion, a goat, and a serpent, and each head has its own method of attack. The lion will attempt to bite and scratch you with physical attacks, the snake in the back will attempt to poison you, and the goat will cast spells at you. Each of these heads can be destroyed one at a time to make the fight a lot easier. Golems are artificial life forms that are created by sorcerers, which are made of impenetrable rock. They repel magic attacks, and the only weak area they have are the magic metals that are coated along their body. In order to defeat the golem, you must destroy these metals. Ogres are very ugly ape-like creatures that are known for their formidable strength and speed. It should be noted that they are very attracted to women and will actively target female party members whenever they come into contact. Slimes are slow-moving creatures that can maneuver through complex terrain as the substances in their bodies dissolve enemies that get in the way. They are immune to physical attacks, so you will need to make sure to have magic in your party to deal with them. Leapworms are like little maggots that will jump and damage you with a small bite, and these can often be found with slimes or in caves. Skeletons are immortal monsters that perpetually wander in death and can be found at nighttime primarily. Even though they're nothing but cursed bones, they will continue to pursue you if you do not destroy their head. Undead are rotting corpses which are reanimated by the forces of evil, and they will appear primarily at night and will sniff out and attack the living. They are weak to fire and holy attacks alike. Phantasms and specters are ghost-like creatures that can only be primarily damaged by magic. They can possess the pawns that travel with you, so you will need to make sure to ward them off if that so happens. Griffins are giant monsters with the wings of an eagle and the body of a lion, and they will soar high and circle in the sky, striking once spotting their prey. You will encounter these monsters a lot more often in Dragon's Dogma 2 than you did in Dragon's Dogma 1, and they have the tendency to fly away if the fight becomes too tiresome for them. Thankfully, their wings are weak to fire, and you can also cling to them and follow them back to their nest after a short flight. Choppers are a type of goblin that lurk in the shadows of the deep forest. They are very quick on their feet, and they excel at ambushing and taking advantage of the terrain in which they live. Likewise, knackers are a type of goblin that wield a long weapon, and they are very agile on elevated terrain and are good at raiding. You do not want to underestimate them, as they can quickly overtake your party. Rattlers are much like saurians, but they are four-legged beasts who seem to be covered in rocks, and they appear in the mountainous terrain and can be easily mistaken for a giant rolling boulder. You'll want to try to knock them down and aim for their weak spot on their soft bellies. Cyclops are monstrously strong, one-eyed giants, and they wield giant weapons with ease and won't back down from any kind of fight. They also may be armored in some cases. You'll need to strike their lone eye with ranged attacks or climb on top and target that eye with melee. Additionally, they seem to be weak to elemental attacks as well. Minotaurs are ferocious and extremely fierce bull-headed monsters, and a single hit from their battle axe or charge attack can be very fatal. You'll want to keep your distance and time your counters in order to defeat this foe. A wight is a priest spirit that still holds a grudge, eventually becoming a monster. It hides in darkness and is often found at night, casting powerful spells in succession from the sky. It wields a huge amount of magic, making upfront attacks very difficult, but if you have ranged members in your party, they are easier to deal with. Duelahans are like spectral knights that are covered in a spiritual purple flame and cradle its own head in its arm. They engage in deadly swordplay with a firm stance, and in the dark they will transform into black mist and stalk the living. Thankfully, they do seem to be weak to high-powered magic. Next, the Drake is a monster of the dragon family, and they spit out very powerful flames. It possesses the intelligence to skillfully manipulate magic and seem to be related to the Arisen in some way. They have a lot of health and can even take control of your pawns, so if you encounter one, be prepared for a war. Thankfully, their weak spot is fairly obvious at their heart. Next is the Medusa, which has a head of snakes, the body of a serpent, and the face of a woman. They can turn enemies into stone just by looking at them, and you don't even need to look at its eyes. Thankfully, as with any monster, they can be dealt with, and you can even use their head as an eventual weapon as well. Next we have the Talos, which is the towering bronze giant from the Greek legends. Rising from the sea, its massive frame can walk over valleys with ease, and just like a divine punishment, it can mercilessly bring chaos to any land it crosses. You'll need to use a combination of tactics and sheer strength to take out this foe. And lastly, we have the Sphinx, which is not essential from the story, but can be accessed via side exploration. They have the head of a woman, the body of a lion, and the wings of a bird, and its demeanor can be described as very bird-like. She deals with riddles and will give missable rewards if you guess incorrectly. If you happen to get on her bad side, be prepared for a lot of flames, magic attacks, and big melee damage with claws. Of course, all these monsters are going to be a challenge to contend with, but you must also be ready for the inevitable fight with the dragon at the end, which, as we've seen, is absolutely massive, breathes fire, and may hold a deeper truth to the world than initially realized. And you'll need every bit of strength to wrest back your heart from its clutches. Dragon's Dogma 2 has confirmed 10 vocations that we'll be using in order to dish out some damage using the combat system we mentioned earlier. Each vocation has its own strengths and weaknesses, as well as skills and abilities that you'll be using to turn the tide of battle into your favor. If you're familiar with the color system from Dragon's Dogma 1, that is non-existent in Dragon's Dogma 2. Colors are less important in Dragon's Dogma 2 as far as vocation icons go, so you'll have to pay more attention to what each vocation actually does rather than what you can expect from a previously similarly colored vocation. Like I said, we'll be using vocations mainly to deal the combat side of Dragon's Dogma's content, and while you're on your journey, you may meet some vocation meisters that will help you unlock Meister's teachings. At the time of recording this video, there's not much known about vocation meisters other than 3 of them, and we know that they teach Meister's teachings, but it's not known if you need to meet them in order to unlock certain vocations. As far as what vocations you have access to, the 4 basic vocations of Fighter, Mage, Archer, and Thief are accessible at the very start of the game. Advanced vocations and hybrid vocations such as the Warrior, Sorcerer, Mystic, Spearhand, Magic Archer, Trickster, and Warfarer are going to be unlocked later on. We know that the Warrior and Sorcerer are unlocked via quest, but not much else is known about the hybrid vocations. It should be noted as well that while Arisen can equip whatever vocation that they need, Pawns can only equip the basic and advanced vocations, meaning they only have access to the Fighter, Mage, Archer, Thief, Warrior, and Sorcerer vocations. It would be pretty wild if we had 4 magic archers roaming around. Like we said before, each vocation has its own strengths and weaknesses and has its own role to play in the combat of Dragon's Dogma 2. For example, fighters carry a sword and shield, archers carry a bow, thieves carry dual daggers, and mages cast magic. And while there are some similarities between some vocations, each one has its own unique role to play in the combat of Dragon's Dogma 2, and it's not like your traditional D&D class where one class can be more powerful than the other just simply for being an evolution of another. What this means is that even the basic vocations of Dragon's Dogma 2 are overpowered in their own way at a certain point. There is no necessity to switch between vocations if you don't want to. You can theoretically play the whole game as the same vocation, and you won't be missing out on very much power because of it. But as I said before, each vocation has its own strengths and weaknesses, so you'll need to make sure that yours match up if you happen to face an opponent that has a certain way of attacking or defending. Take for example a golem that we mentioned in the monster section. While its body is completely immune to magic attacks, you do need to destroy the magic metals on its body with physical attacks. Therefore, you'll want to make sure that you have a vocation that is adept at dealing physical damage. Using something like a mage might be a little less useful in this instance. And the same thing goes if you're fighting harpies. You may find a bit more success if you use an archer vocation as opposed to a fighter, for example. And I will reiterate here in terms of stat growth, Dragon's Dogma 2 appears to do stat growth a bit differently. Whenever you level up, you get a certain amount of stats that are allocated to you based on whichever vocation you have equipped. Instead of permanently increasing your stats depending on whatever vocation you have to be at the time, now stats are fluid between vocations. This means that your base stats will always be in an optimal setup depending on whichever vocation you choose. So if you're a fighter vocation, you might have more strength than a mage vocation, but if you swap to the mage, damage, you'll see your strength decrease and your magic increase to compensate. And now that we've covered all the basics, let's go ahead and get into a brief overview of each vocation so you have a better idea of which one to choose. We'll start with the basic vocations: Fighter, Mage, Thief, and Archer. The Fighter is a physically oriented vocation that deals with a sword and shield. It primarily focuses on physical offense and physical defense and has a parry mechanic that you can unlock later in the vocation. You can also counter with elemental attacks once your shield is enchanted with either fire, frost, or thunder. Some of its skills you can wield include a blink strike, which makes you charge forward towards the enemy, compass slash, which lets you do a 360 slash to escape from danger, and a complete onslaught of blows if you happen to time it properly. Most of what you'll be doing with the Fighter is parrying though, or deflecting, with its vocation action being the act of blocking with its shield. If you happen to time your block just as an attack connects, you'll be able to parry the blow and reflect some damage back to the target. This allows for a high skill ceiling and can completely negate the stamina cost and damage that you would otherwise take whenever it's timed well. So while it may be easy to get into, it definitely has a high ceiling that you'll be able to utilize to take on any foe you'd like. If a fighter deals with physical attack and physical defense, then the mage is the complete opposite. The mage is a magic user that focuses on defense, utility, and some offensive capabilities in the form of a spellcaster. Their core skill, Anodyne, is essential for any young party going out on any journey, as it provides free heals without the use of curatives. They are also one of the only vocations that can grant elemental boons to their allies, allowing them to deal magical damage where they otherwise would not. They also deal with a lot of utility, using celerity to increase the speed of their party, and casting Halidom to remove certain status ailments. That's not to say that they don't pack a punch themselves though. They can also levitate and cast spells just like a sorcerer would. This can include Fulguration, which allows them to spray flames in front of them, and they can even cast Levin, which is a thunder striking ability. So if you're looking for magical offense, defense, and utility for the entire team, then Mage is the vocation for you. Often viewed as an all-out offensive class, the Thief also carries some utility with it as well. While most of their attacks are very quick and are rapid, they do carry some additional skills that you might find useful in some niche circumstances. They have an ability called Shadow Cloak, which allows them to blend into their environment and sneak up on different enemies. They also can cast Ensnare, which will allow them to grapple onto certain enemies, pull them in close, and attack them at short range. Did I mention that the Thief also has a dodge button? Its vocation action is Swift Step, which allows them to gain iframes and quickly move out of the way of an enemy attack. Probably one of their most powerful abilities though is the Helm Splitter, which allows them to spin all up in the air and deal massive damage to massive enemies. And they even have an ability to set their own blades on fire, negating the use for a mage on your party to some extent. But we can't talk about the Thief without talking about their Masterful Kill counterattack, which is some of the most damage you'll probably find in the game. By preparing a small window, the Thief then shimmies out of existence to reappear with a devastating blow. So if you're looking for an all-out attacker with many different rapid fire strikes, then Thief is the vocation for you. And finally, the last of the basic vocations is the Archer vocation. The Archer is a master of physical attack at range, and they primarily want to stay in the back of the action, dealing steady amounts of damage while avoiding it themselves. They have many tools to deal massive amounts of damage at range, including this one, which can halt a Minotaur in the middle of its charge. They also unlock a Meister's Teaching, which is called Heavenly Shot, which can deal massive amounts of damage by itself. But that's not the only thing. They also possess a lot of utility in their trick arrows, with skills such as Exploding Shot, Drenching Shot, and Blighting Shot. And they can also deal with enemies up close with a series of kicks as well. So if you're looking for a fast-moving, ranged physical attacker, then the Archer vocation should be the one for you. Now that we've covered the basic vocations, we can get into the advanced ones. The Warrior vocation is an absolute menace, and it deals a ton of damage with some limited defense. All of its skills are heavily weighted towards its weapon, of course, and it will deal massive damage if given the space to. Not only do they possess a skill called Chain of Blows, which allows you to deal faster and faster strikes if you time the counter swipe correctly, but most of their moves are actually chargeable, which allows them to deal even more damage, especially if you time them right at the moment of charge. They possess a vocation action, which allows them to use the move Barge, which will stagger enemies and interrupt any animation you happen to be in. This is great for creating space and creating openings so that your team can land some blows of their own. They also possess a very powerful counter skill called Tidal Fury, which will deliver a momentous Mantis counterattack if the user is struck at the moment of activation, and can even guard against target's strikes even if the counterattack fails. So if you're looking for an unstoppable killing machine and want to replace your fighter vocation, the warrior is a good alternative with much more damage. The flip side of that coin in the advanced vocations is the sorcerer vocation, which deals mainly in offensive spells. While the mage may have to pace itself in casting its spells, the sorcerer possesses a core skill called Galvanize, which will rapidly recover stamina through single-minded focus. This gives the sorcerer a lot of room to cast a lot of spells, which is exactly what it wants to do at all times. And while a rapid-fire volley of spells might be what you're looking for, the sorcerer also possesses a lot of much more powerful spells that take a much longer time than normal to cast, but will deal massive amounts of damage. They have a spell called Bolide, which allows you to summon meteors, cast them into the sky, and watch them rain upon your enemies. They also have a spell called Seism, which allows you to cause earthquakes and ground swells, which will damage enemies. And they also have Maelstrom, which allows you to create a massive storm in place. And that's on top of the ability to levitate and use the vocation action quick spell to cast your spells more frequently. As an additional boon for the sorcerer vocation, they also gain the ability to spell sync, meaning that if you have a sorcerer as a pawn and they know the same spell as you, you can often chain up with their cast time to then reduce the cast time and increase the power of the spell. This allows for double the power and not necessarily double the time. And those are just a few of the boons that the sorcerer vocation possesses. And that about covers all the basic and advanced vocations. Now we'll get into hybrid vocations, which again only the Arisen can use. The first of which is the Mystic Spearhand. The Mystic Spearhand is a combination of the physical attributes from the fighter vocation and the magical attributes from the mage. With these powers combined, he channels both physical prowess and magical capabilities to deal an all-out offensive attack. By using his vocation action Redoubted Bolt, he can fire a magical burst that won't deal any damage but will cause his targets to flinch. If this vocation action is charged up to Forbeating Volt, he can alter the effects of this so that it prevents the target's movement. When pressing the jump button right after this action, he can then teleport to the enemy to deal an insanely quick flurry of physical strikes. Or alternatively, if you prefer the wide-ranging flinching capabilities of Scattering Bolt, you can then disperse the Forbeating Volt, which will ensnare multiple targets in the area and prevent them from moving. And at this fully charged form, he can blink pretty much any enemy he so chooses. With his Duo Spear, he can twirl it in place, which allows for a very large flurry of attacks and can pretty much do this infinitely. He has a skill called Unto Sky, which will send smaller enemies flying and will deal big damage to larger enemies. He can use the skill Humble Offering to telekinetically grab enemies that have been stunned or defeated in order to cast them towards other targets. And he can also learn a Meister's Teaching called Wild Fury, which allows him to create a magical double of himself, which will deal additional damage in addition to his physical strikes. So if you're looking for an all-out offensive vocation, then the Mystic Spearhand should be the one for you. If you'd still like to fight at range, we do have the Magic Archer vocation. Combining the magical elements of the Mage vocation and the range capabilities of the Archer vocation, the Magic Archer possesses both offensive capabilities and utility for their team. One of the more useful abilities the Magic Archer possesses is Remedy Arrow, which will allow you to charge up an arrow that's blessed with magic that revives fallen pawns when fully charged and will heal them as well. If you decide to loose the arrow too early before the timer is done, it will also just flat out restore the health of any ally it hits. But if you prefer to go on the offensive side, it does possess Frost Hunter Bolt, which will send ice arrows to continuously target the enemy it is fired at. The frost bolts continuously deal frostbite until the enemy is frozen. When paired with the core skill Protracting Arrow, it will allow you to gain the elemental enchantment on your Magic Archer bow to allow you to self-enchant your own attacks. So after using an elementally charged skill, you can immediately fire your normal arrows to then still inflict elemental damage. Two of the strongest attacks that the Magic Archer has to be the Flame Fang Arrow and Ricochet Hunter. Flame Fang Arrow allows you to loose an arrow of magical flame that will explode on impact, and if you fire this while using the vocation action Rivet Shot, it will allow you to control the trajectory of the arrow. This will also incur a fire enchantment on the magic bow if you happen to strike with it. Similarly, Ricochet Hunter is a thunder type attack that will allow you to shoot multiple fast firing arrows arrows similar to a machine gun. While the attack does have a lot of recoil, it does massive damage in enclosed spaces given the amount of time the arrows can ricochet off of different surfaces. And again, this will incur the thunder enchantment on your magic bow, which will allow you to deal thunder damage with your regular attacks. But probably the biggest attack that the magic archer has is this wide-ranging holy attack, which will sap the health of your own Arisen, but will allow you to crowd control pretty much enemy you come across, including this griffin. So while the magic archer has a wide range of utility you can use for just about any encounter, it also possesses a lot of offensive capabilities that will absolutely put down anything you aim your bow at. The next hybrid vocation is a completely new concept to the Dragon's Dogma franchise, and it's called the Trickster vocation. The Trickster wields a censer and deals in magical illusions. While the Trickster can deal no damage of its own, its primary focus is playing with the minds of its enemies and buffing your pawns. By using the attack Ephegeal Incense and using the vocation action Invoking Incense, it will allow you to create a clone and move it around at your will. Hitting enemies with your illusory fumes will also make it aggro towards the clone or yourself, depending on if you have a clone at all. This is a great way to draw aggro from the rest of your team onto a clone that basically cannot deal any direct damage to you or your pawns. But of course, the Trickster possesses more than just a clone. The Trickster possesses a skill which will allow it to create illusory barriers that block the sight of your enemies. One trait of this barrier is that it's wide enough for you to fit inside, so if you'd like to continue to attack enemies while inside the barrier, there is nothing that the enemies can do. While in this barrier, you may choose to use Espial Incense, which will allow you to detach your spirit and move around the battlefield freely. This skill can allow you to view enemies ahead of time and can also serve as a target for Ephegeal Incense if you decide to teleport your clone to it. While this does leave the caster's physical body open to attack, it does allow you to set up some amazing techniques along with the next skill, which is Tricky Terrace. This allows the caster to place a trick platform in front of a drop-off. When paired correctly with your astral projection along with your Ephegeal Incense, it can cause enemies to fall off the Tricky Terrace rather quickly, and this can lead to some funny moments if you know what you're doing. The Trickster can also conjure massive illusions with Dragon's Delusion, and it can even rally your pawns in the form of Aromatic Rally, which will boost the offensive capabilities of any allies in the vicinity past their previous limits. So if you know which skills to pair, you can lead to some pretty quick encounters despite not dealing any direct damage of your own. The vocation is a bit unorthodox, but it does leave the door open if you prefer to play Dragon's Dogma 2 a little bit differently. And finally, the last vocation we'll cover is the Warfarer vocation. This is a sort of combination of all the vocations put together, where you can select up to 3 vocations to wield at once while dealing with lower stats. The main draw of the Warfarer vocation is that you get to use the skills of any vocation you have equipped while trading in for less damage and less defenses. So if there's a combination of moves that you can think of between 3 different vocations, this is the vocation for you. You may want to select this vocation whenever you're more comfortable with 3 or more vocations of your own beforehand, so make sure that you weigh the drawbacks of this vocation before selecting it for your adventure. While I did give a brief overview of every vocation, there is still much more to learn whenever Dragon's Dogma 2 finally releases. This was just a glimpse at what each vocation can do, and beyond all these skills, they also have augments. Augments are selectable abilities that you can equip to any vocation once you have them unlocked. Let's say, for example, you unlock the strength buff from the thief vocation. Once you have that augment unlocked and you want to switch vocations, say to Mystic Spearhand, you can take that strength augment from the thief vocation and apply it to your current vocation. This will incentivize you to play as many vocations as possible and unlock every augment you can in order to strengthen your character fully. And the same can be applied to pawns as well. So with that all being said, you have a lot of decisions to make whenever you decide to take down the dragon, and I hope that you put in the time and effort to understand each strength and weakness to each vocation so you can be as effective as possible when dealing with this great foe. And that is everything you need to know before you buy Dragon's Dogma 2. I hope the video was as informative as I was hoping it would be, which is very informative. And I hope that even if you've been following the channel for a while or the Dragon's Dogma 2 scene in general, that you might have picked up something new from this video. So if you did, a lot of time and effort went into this video over the course of the past 3 days, I would really appreciate a like and a subscribe if you want to see more Dragon's Dogma 2 content in the future. As of the recording of this video, Dragon's Dogma 2 is not out quite quite yet, but when it is, you can be sure that I'll be playing the life out of it, and I'll be making content here and there. I think for the most part I want to lay low, save for a few moments that I find during my gameplay, but I really want to enjoy the game for the first week, so I might be a bit quiet whenever it first comes out. So thank you guys if you made it this far. Be sure to check out the rest of the channel's content while you're waiting for Dragon Dogma 2, or for any new content if you're watching this after the release. Don't forget to use my link to download Raid Shadow Legends, and I'll talk to you again real soon.